welcome to Women in Sparta, a special show by the fan of history, that's me. The main show I do is a narrative from 1000 BC to 500 BC. There are two parts of this. This is part 3. So Legends of Sparta, Life in Sparta, and then Women in Sparta. I'm just a fan of history, so if I say anything wrong, please correct me and give me a source, and I learn and improve. I read a lot about women in Sparta and I heard a lot of things said. So I'm here to clear out the misunderstandings. So I'm going to talk about life in Sparta as a free woman, about the slave women, about Spartan wife sharing, and about heterosexuality and homosexuality in Sparta. Sparta has the reputation of being the best place to be a woman in ancient Greece, and we shall see if that is the case. So, remember from the first two parts that everything in Sparta is geared towards preserving the Spartan state and the Spartan way of life. If you do not conform to the Spartan state, you should die. And that means that you can't think freely, you can't be weak, you have to be strong, you have to work for Sparta, and this goes for the women as well. So how does a woman serve the Spartan state? Well, she serves the Spartan state by preserving it, by bearing children. So childbearing is extremely important in Sparta. There were 3 social classes in Sparta, but women could never be equals. They could never be full Spartan citizens. Just like in Athens. But all non-slave women were free but not equal. But if you're married to an equal, that will give you a higher status than if you were married to a non-equal. So the goal of a Spartan woman is to become the mother of as many warriors as possible. Like the guy from your right is your ideal son. Childbirth is a sacred duty to the Spartan state. And Spartan women were famous for their fertility compared to other Greeks, or among other Greeks. They were also famous for their physical fitness and the way they behaved. Other Greeks were often shocked at how Spartan women behaved and how they dressed, etc. Sparta did almost on purpose not record its history and practices, which means that this is somewhat hard to do, but we are going to try to look at the life of a Spartan woman from the beginning to the end. First, you are born, and if you're a girl, you're not exposed, you're not judged, and nobody, not even boys, are thrown from cliffs in Sparta. When you grow up, this is not well documented at all, but we can see a trend that Spartan women have a high level of formal education. They can read and write, some of them at least. So there is an education system of some sort for the girls in Sparta. They also receive a lot of physical training. They participate in games. They learn arts, music, dancing, and poetry. They are not subjected to anything as strict as the agoge, the system for boys. They can stay with their family until they marry. So Spartan girls are probably very attached to their mothers. But some of them learn to read and write, as I mentioned. There's also the Gymnopaedia, the Spartan festival of naked youths. And there women participated naked. There were also Spartan women competing in the Olympics, and this was very controversial because women were not allowed in the Olympics. I can see the scene in front of me when the delegation from Sparta arrives at the Olympics, and you have these fit, strong girls that want to compete with men from other cities in Greece, and some Athenian goes, "Oh, women are not allowed," and the Spartan men goes, "Well, who is gonna tell them? Are you gonna tell them?" And the Athenian guy goes, "I don't dare to." So, what is it like to be an adult Spartan woman? You could own property and you could inherit property. You were dressed in very simple clothes, but all the Spartans were dressed in simple clothes. But the Spartan women clothing was notoriously short and constantly shocked other Greeks and other foreigners. So some remark that the Spartan's woman's leg is always spread. You are not allowed as a woman to have long hair. Only men can have long hair. And you are not supposed to do any domestic duties. You don't cook, you don't weave, you don't clean, because the Helots do that. So you are in charge of other things, like maintaining those Helots and ruling the property. Marriage is later for Spartan women than other Greek women, but it is much earlier than Spartan men. So you probably marry in your late teens or your early 20s. You are also allowed to divorce. You don't lose your property. You are not required to remarry. So you can be an unmarried woman in Sparta. That's perfectly okay. But you could also remarry as much as you want. If there is a divorce, girls often stay with their mother, but the father or the mother, nobody got the boys, because the state got the boys and they were put in the agoge from 7 years of age, as we have mentioned before. So no twists, no fights there over who gets the boys. The state always gets the boys. The most important duty of a Spartan woman was to be a mother. You were encouraged to produce many children, preferably male children. If you manage to breed a brave warrior, that's a source of great pride for you. And if your son becomes a popular warrior, then you are really cool. But the worst thing that could happen to you is that your son is a weakling, that is a coward, and then you hate him. So the classical saying is then the mother says to the Spartan warrior, come home with this shield or upon it. Because if you come home without the shield, you have thrown it away in order to run away from battle, and then you're not allowed to come home. But if you die, the people in your club, your 15 warrior partners, they will carry you on your shield, and that's okay, because that's the highest honor for a man, to die in war for Sparta. So Spartan men were away a lot fighting. So the population of Sparta was actually mostly female then, at most times. And then also the mother ruled the household when the father was away. She controlled the Helots, she controlled the business of the household, and the woman actually had a lot of liberties and power in Sparta compared to other Greek cities. If you die in childbirth, you die trying to give birth to a Spartan, and that is exactly the same as dying in battle. So this is the ultimate sacrifice for the Spartan state, and you are allowed to have a gravestone, something which is only allowed for men if they die in battle. If you're a Helot, if you're a slave, you are treated the same as other Helots. You will do your duties, you are tied to the land, and your children become Helots. There is no recorded case, as far as I know, of Spartan equals having children with Helot women, but I'm sure it happened. But even if it did, it doesn't help the Spartan state. It doesn't create more equals. It doesn't create more warriors for Sparta. So that would not have been it would not have been approved by the Spartan state. There is a very weird practice in Sparta called wife sharing. Because you need these new Spartan warriors to be as strong as possible. So some men would allow, especially older men who had maybe a second wife who was very young, would allow younger, more fit men to impregnate their wives. Also, an unmarried man or childless man who felt he could be a good father would request another man's wife to carry his children if she had previously been a strong childbearer. This was very frowned upon by other Greeks, and it could be an invention by Athenians probably to put down Sparta, but this seems to have happened, and these brainwashed Spartans are only focused on we need more Spartans. So this was probably happening in Sparta. So were the Spartans feminist? Well, not in any modern sense. But remember the goals. Everybody should serve the Spartan state, and the Spartan state need more warriors. It always needs more warriors, more equals. So the women are Spartan breeding machines. They have a lot of freedom compared to Athenian women or other women in Greek. But still, Sparta is an extremely patriarchal society ruled by men. You were always under the rule of a man, under your father or under your husband. So compared to any modern society, or even compared to the Vikings, this is not a great society to be a woman in. But it's much better than in the rest of Greece at this time. So I would say that Sparta was a fairly miserable place to be a woman in, but it was much better than the rest of Greece. So let's talk about Spartan sexuality, because there are a lot of myths about this. And there's been a major discussion among historians on the Historum forums. If you're interested, ask me and I'll give you a link. But remember the goals then. We must serve the Spartan state, we must create Spartan warriors, women are Spartan breeding machines. So, homosexuality, not good. This is the most homophobic place in all of Greek. So they don't have sex with the boys. They don't have sex with each other. Because Spartan men must create more Spartan men. And the only way to do that is to be heterosexual. So this goes through all of Spartan society. That heterosexuality is encouraged, it's approved, it's celebrated. And it is very likely that homosexual relationships were outlawed, that they were really, really bad. And this is not the case in the rest of Greece at all. Having sex with boys was normal in Athens, but absolutely not. And this image here to the right has actually been used on some pages. I saw that this is two Spartan men having sex. But remember that Spartan women are not allowed to grow their hair long. So Spartan man would have a beard. So the figure on the right is obviously a woman. And Spartans, once again, there is no piece of Spartan art with any homosexual imagery. They all come from other Greek cities. And there are actually no ancient sources that, as far as I know right now, that mentions homosexual Spartans. But what about female homosexuals? What about Spartan lesbians? Well, we would not know if there were Spartan lesbians. The Spartans did not document anything. And there is a great difference in how the ancients, how the Romans and the Greeks look at sex. It is not like we look at sex today. Sex is the act of penetration. For example, if you're a man, you're not a homosexual if you penetrate another man. But you are if you allowed yourself to be penetrated. It's about power. So the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, they would not consider lesbian lovemaking to be real. They don't understand it. Girls can do whatever they want with each other because nobody's getting penetrated. And you could live with other women probably because nobody would, oh, she's living with her friend. But as long as you're still getting children, you have to breed children for the Spartan state. And Sappho of Lesbos comes around later than the narrative is at right now. She probably dies around 570 BC. And with Sappho, we sort of get the concept of being lesbian. But a Spartan would not recognize lesbians if they were lying in the bed beside him. So I hope I didn't go out of bounds there. That's the Sparta thing. We talked about the legends of Sparta. We talked about life in Sparta for women and for men. We have dispelled some myths about Sparta. And now Sparta will become a really important actor in the narrative, because this is a very powerful Greek city-state. But next time we'll talk about the events of the 790s BC, because Israel has been praying for a savior who should save them from Aram Damascus, who's winning the long, long war of the 9th century. And there is one. Israel will get a savior. Please check out my Facebook page, my Twitter, my WordPress. Like and share this stuff because it will help me to keep going. Thank you for watching.